Portland, Oregon, February 1994. The backstage hallway of the Memorial Coliseum was a chaotic mess of road crew, journalists, and hangers-on trying to get 5 minutes with Kurt Cobain. Security was doing their best to keep the chaos contained, but it was one of those nights where everyone wanted a piece of Nirvana. The show had been explosive, one of those performances where Kurt seemed to channel every ounce of pain and rage into his guitar, leaving the audience stunned and the band exhausted. Kurt sat in the dressing room, his head in his hands, trying to will away the familiar burn in his stomach that no amount of medication seemed to fix. Courtney was on the road with Hole. Francis was with a nanny back in Seattle, and Kurt felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him like a physical thing. The tour was grinding him down. Every city blurred into the next. Every hotel room felt like a prison cell. Every morning he woke up wondering how much longer he could keep doing this. A knock on the door made him look up. One of the security guards, a guy named Marcus, who'd been with them since the Nevermind tour, stuck his head in. "Kurt, there's a kid out here. Can't be more than 12. Been waiting for 3 hours. She's got a letter for you." Kurt's first instinct was to say no. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, and the last thing he wanted was to put on the Kurt Cobain face for a fan. But something in Marcus's voice made him pause. "She's been crying the whole time," Marcus added quietly. "Won't leave. Won't talk to anyone else. Just keeps saying she needs to give you this letter." Kurt sighed and rubbed his face. "Yeah, okay. Send her in." The girl who walked through the door looked tiny and terrified. She had dark hair cut short, oversized jeans held up with a rope belt, and a Nirvana shirt that was clearly homemade, the band's name written in shaky marker across a plain white tee. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she clutched a crumpled envelope in both hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. She stood just inside the doorway, frozen, staring at Kurt like she couldn't believe he was real. Kurt tried to give her a reassuring smile, though he wasn't sure how convincing it was, given how hollowed out he felt. "Hey," he said gently. "What's your name?" The girl's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried again. "Sarah," she whispered, so quietly Kurt almost didn't hear it. "Hi, Sarah. Marcus said you have a letter for me?" Sarah nodded and took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of Kurt. Up close, he could see she'd been crying for a while. Her hands were shaking as she held out the envelope. Kurt took it carefully, noticing how the paper was worn soft from being handled so many times. "Do you want me to read it now?" he asked. Sarah nodded, then suddenly burst into tears again. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and desperate. Kurt's exhaustion evaporated instantly. He stood up and guided Sarah to the couch, sitting down next to her. "Hey, it's okay. Whatever it is, it's okay." But Sarah couldn't stop crying. She buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking. Kurt looked around helplessly, wishing Courtney or literally anyone better at this kind of thing was there. But it was just him and this devastated 12-year-old, and the letter in his hands that suddenly felt heavy as a brick. Kurt opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper covered in careful handwriting. The ink was smudged in places where tears had fallen. Kurt began to read, and with each line, his heart broke a little more. "Dear Kurt Cobain, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 12 years old. I'm writing this letter because I don't think I'll be alive much longer, and I need someone to know my story. I need someone to know that I existed and that I mattered, even if it was just for a little while. My dad started hurting me when I was 7. I don't want to write the details because it makes me feel sick, but it's been happening for 5 years and my mom doesn't believe me. I tried to tell her 3 times and she called me a liar. She said I was trying to break up our family. She said if I ever said anything like that again, she'd send me away." Kurt felt his throat tighten. He forced himself to keep reading. "I tried to kill myself 2 months ago. I took a whole bottle of my mom's sleeping pills." But they found me and pumped my stomach, and everyone was so mad at me. The doctors asked why I did it, and I tried to tell them about my dad, but they said I was acting out for attention. Nobody believes me. Nobody will help me. I feel like I'm drowning and everyone is just watching. The only thing that keeps me alive is your music. When I listen to Nirvana, especially All Apologies, I feel like someone understands. I feel like maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not making it up. Maybe someone out there knows what it's like to hurt this much and still have to pretend everything is okay. Kurt had to stop reading for a moment. He looked at Sarah, who was still crying, and felt a rage building inside him so intense it scared him, not at Sarah, at every adult who'd failed her, at a world that could let this happen to a child. I know you probably get a million letters and you'll never read this, the letter continued. But I needed to write it anyway. I needed to tell someone. If something happens to me, if I can't keep going anymore, I want someone to know it wasn't because I was weak. It was because I was tired of fighting alone. Thank you for your music. Thank you for making me feel less alone, even if you never know I existed. You saved my life more times than you'll ever know. Love, Sarah. Kurt carefully folded the letter and set it down. He turned to Sarah, who was watching him with terrified eyes, like she was waiting for him to tell her she was lying too. Instead, Kurt did something that shocked her. He pulled her into a hug and held on tight. I believe you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I believe every word you wrote, and you're not alone anymore, okay? You're not alone. Sarah clung to him and sobbed. Kurt held her and let her cry, feeling his own tears running down his face. When she finally pulled back, Kurt looked her straight in the eyes. Sarah, what's happening to you is not okay. It's not your fault. You're not crazy and you're not a liar, and we're going to fix this right now, tonight. Sarah shook her head frantically. You can't tell anyone. If you tell anyone, my dad will... Your dad is going to jail, Kurt interrupted, his voice hard as steel. Because what he's doing to you is a crime. And every adult who didn't protect you failed their job. But I'm not going to fail you. Do you understand me? I'm not going to let this keep happening. Kurt called Marcus back into the room. I need you to get me a phone, now, and find out who we call for Child Protective Services emergencies. Marcus took one look at Kurt's face and didn't ask questions. Within 10 minutes, Kurt was on the phone with a crisis counselor, explaining the situation and reading parts of Sarah's letter. Sarah was terrified. They're going to take me away. I don't have anywhere to go. Kurt crouched down in front of her. Anywhere is better than where you are now, and I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. You're not going to disappear into the system. 2 social workers arrived within an hour. Kurt stayed with Sarah the entire time she gave her statement. He held her hand when she had to describe what her father had done. When they said they needed to take her into emergency protective custody that night, Kurt made them promise to call him with updates. Before Sarah left, Kurt pulled her aside one more time. I want you to know something, he said. You are the bravest person I've ever met. It took more courage to write that letter and hand it to me than most people show in their entire lives. You asked for help even when nobody was listening. You kept fighting even when you wanted to give up. That's not weakness, that's strength. He pulled off the necklace he was wearing, a simple chain with a guitar pick. I want you to keep this. And every time you look at it, I want you to remember that you matter. Your life matters. Your story matters. And you're not alone anymore. Sarah took the necklace with shaking hands. Will I ever see you again? Kurt smiled, though tears were still running down his face. Yeah, you will. I'm going to make sure of it. After Sarah left with the social workers, Kurt sat alone in the dressing room for a long time. He picked up her letter and read it again, then carefully folded it and put it in his wallet. It would stay there for the rest of his life. The next morning, Kurt called his lawyer. I want to set up a fund for kids who've been abused. Anonymous. I just want to help kids like Sarah. Within a week, Kurt put in $50,000 of his own money and made arrangements for a portion of Nirvana's royalties to keep it going. He called it the Sarah Fund. Kurt also stayed in touch with Sarah's case through his manager. Sarah's father was arrested and charged. Her mother lost custody. Sarah was placed with a foster family in Eugene, experienced with trauma survivors. Slowly, Sarah began to heal. 3 months later, Kurt arranged for Sarah to come to a Nirvana show in Seattle with her foster parents. When Sarah walked into the dressing room, she looked different, still healing, but there was hope in her eyes. "Hey kid," Kurt said. "How are you doing?" Sarah hugged him tight. "I'm okay. Some days are hard, but I'm okay." During the show that night, Kurt dedicated all apologies to a friend who taught me what real courage looks like. Sarah stood side stage with her foster parents and cried, but this time they were different tears. Tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of someone who'd been drowning and finally made it to shore. After Kurt's death in April 1994, Sarah was devastated, but she held on to that guitar pick necklace like a lifeline. At his memorial, she wrote him a letter and burned it with the other tributes, telling him that he'd saved her life in every way a person can be saved. The Sarah Fund continued after Kurt's death, managed by his estate. Over the next 3 decades, it would help thousands of abused children get therapy, legal representation, and safe housing. Most people never knew it existed. That's how Kurt wanted it. Sarah grew up to become a social worker specializing in child abuse cases. She spent her career fighting for kids like she'd been, making sure they were heard and believed and protected. In every office where she worked, she kept a framed photo of Kurt Cobain on her desk. When people asked about it, she'd smile and say, "He saved my life." Years later, in an interview about her work, Sarah told the story of that night in Portland. "Kurt Cobain is remembered as a musician, as a rock star, as a troubled genius," she said. "But I remember him as the first adult who believed me. The first person who saw me as a child who needed help instead of a problem that needed to go away. He could have just taken my letter and forgotten about it. Instead, he stopped everything and made sure I was safe. He didn't have to do that. But he did it anyway because that's who he was." The letter Sarah gave Kurt that night in Portland was found in his wallet after his death. It had been read so many times the creases were worn through. On the back, in Kurt's handwriting, was a note: "Believed her, protected her. That's what matters." The story of Kurt and Sarah became one of those quiet legends that true Nirvana fans know but casual listeners never hear. It wasn't about music or fame or the mythology of Kurt Cobain the rock star. It was about Kurt Cobain the human being who saw a child in pain and chose to help. In a life marked by struggles with addiction, depression, and the pressures of fame, that night in Portland stood out as something pure. A moment where Kurt's empathy and rage at injustice combined into decisive action. A moment where he used his power not for himself, but for someone who had none. Sarah Mitchell is in her 40s now, with children of her own. She still has the guitar pick necklace, though she doesn't wear it anymore. It sits in a shadow box in her living room, next to the only photo she has of her and Kurt together, taken by a crew member that night in Portland. Her kids know the story, know that their mom is alive because a rock star decided that one 12-year-old's life mattered more than his own exhaustion and pain. On the anniversary of Kurt's death each year, Sarah makes a donation to youth crisis hotlines in his name. It's her way of keeping the promise he made to her that night, the promise that she wasn't alone, that someone believed her, that she mattered. That 12-year-old with a homemade Nirvana shirt and a letter full of pain walked into that dressing room carrying the weight of 5 years of abuse and a lifetime of not being believed. She walked out carrying hope. And that, more than any song or album or performance, might be the most important thing Kurt Cobain ever did.